Okay, as promised, I want to walk you through the basics of the course project for the semester. So I'll just read through this handout primarily, but make some notes as I go. One of your responsibilities, really the main responsibility for this course, will be to analyze and document the phonetic features of a language that is unfamiliar to you. For this project, you will work in conjunction with the speaker of a language that you do not know to prepare a series of short reports throughout the semester that present and describe the phonetic features of the language. You may develop your understanding of the phonetics of the language by consulting published scientific work on the language, or by collecting phonetic data firsthand from your language consultant, or through a combination of both primary and secondary sources, i.e., talking to a human being and also reading some books. For each report, you will make and submit acoustic recordings of your consultant, producing words or sentences in the language that exemplify the phonetic features that are the focus of the project report. For each of these reports, you will also provide acoustic measurements of the recordings you have made of your consultant. The first four of these project reports will cover features of the language that have been discussed in the lectures for the course. The topic of the fifth report, due after our last class meeting, is up to you. And actually, I'll kind of make an addendum here that the very first of these project reports, it doesn't involve language data really at all. It just involves basically biographical information on your consultant and a short description of the language itself. So project reports 2 through 4 involve you recording your consultant speaking in some way and then making an acoustic analysis of those recordings. You're supposed to do something similar for the fifth project report, but the topic you choose for that is up to you. So for this final report, you are welcome and encouraged to study in greater depth whatever phonetic features of the language most interest, surprise, or mystify you. That one is your choice. One of the goals of this project is to help you learn how to identify and quantitatively analyze the sounds of an unfamiliar language through data that you have collected yourself from a native speaker of the language. Another goal is to help give you hands-on experience applying what you have learned in class to the recording, analysis, and transcription of an actual language. So basically, get your hands dirty with real language data through the fun medium of phonetics. Okay, so this is probably different from most other course projects you've done in the past, and one of the ways it's primarily different is that you have to work with another human being who's not necessarily enrolled in the class. So how are you going to do that? And this is, again, admittedly part of this project that will be a bit awkward to work with given our situation. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to be resourceful enough to find somebody you can work with. Every year, students amaze me with how resourceful they are in finding good people for this project. And since people haven't fundamentally changed in the past year, I think that'll still be a feasible goal for this class. But again, I know that it could be difficult because we aren't like going out and talking to each other as much as we used to at the moment. So with that in mind, just take all that as a caveat for this description and work with it the best you can. So your first challenge is to find a language consultant with whom you will work throughout the semester. Here are some characteristics of an ideal language consultant. Number one, they are a native speaker of a language that you do not know. And by native speaker, I mean someone who learned the language as a child and is still capable of using the language in everyday life. Yeah, and there's also kind of some criteria there for what it means to not know the language. So, yeah, you probably know which languages, if any, you have studied like formally in school. So don't pick one. Don't pick one of those. Excuse me. I have a number of students who have come up to me in the past and say, well, I don't know, like my grandparents spoke Cantonese when I was a child, and like I heard some Cantonese, but I don't really speak it myself. Is it okay for me to like study how my grandparents speak Cantonese? And the answer to that is basically yes, kind of especially in the current circumstances. If you've had some exposure to the language, it might be easier for you to sort of perceive the sound contrasts in it or something sort of at a really fundamental, subtle level like that. But if you can't have a conversation in the language or maybe don't know more than 2 or 3 words in it, then yeah, you don't know the language. And it's often a nice way to kind of connect with family members if they speak a language you don't know and you're interested in learning more about that. Those people, your family members, tend to be good language consultants. Number 2, this person should be willing to work with you on a regular basis throughout the semester. Number 3, they should be willing to let you record their speech. Number four, so the other caveat for number three there is that you're going to have to be able to record their speech. If you are like talking to somebody remotely through Zoom or Skype or something like that, it shouldn't be too hard to make a recording of their speech. You could just use Prot or some other software like Zoom. You can record audio that way too. So that part will actually maybe be a little more convenient than it's been in the past. The one issue with that is that oftentimes when generally speaking, when speech goes through a software package like Zoom or what have you, it gets compressed and modified in a way that doesn't make the acoustic analysis easy to do. So you're going to have to navigate that. It should be pretty obvious with the first sort of project report if your recordings are high quality enough to do meaningful acoustic analysis or not, but I'll give you feedback on that, and we'll try to work out the best sort of setup in each case in order for you to be able to get meaningful data out of your recordings. So with that in mind as well, I've had students in the past who have wanted to work with people abroad as they're doing this, and so for whatever reason, people might know somebody in like Prague or something like that, or Jakarta, or who knows. So they've done that. They've just spoken to them online the whole time. So it's workable as long as you explain to the person what exactly you're trying to get out of this project. But again, the quality of the recordings you make are dependent on the internet connection, basically, in that particular case. But I don't care if you go far afield to find somebody to do this who you might happen to know for whatever reason. Fourthly, the fourth criterion here is that this person should be interested in and maybe even proud of their language and will be motivated to work with you to help you understand it. And this applies to a lot of people, thankfully, but make sure that your consultant is one of them, because it is also the case with some other people that they do not care about language very much at all, or might not care that much about you. Try to avoid those people and find the good ones. It is not a good idea to work with someone who no longer feels comfortable speaking their native language, or who you know is too busy to meet with you on a regular basis. That can often be a problem. Don't work with a foreign language professor, please. They're not likely to make a good consultant for your project. So if you know like a Japanese instructor in the School of Languages, Literatures, Linguistics, and Cultures, so on and so forth, the huge name. I said it wrong, but don't work with them, because they got other stuff they got to worry about, and they're used to teaching language in a totally different way. Just find a normal, regular person who speaks a language you don't know. One approach to finding a language consultant is to pick a language that you are interested in and seek out a speaker of that language. Some ways to find a speaker of a particular language: let's say you are interested in, say, Thai, and you want to find a speaker of the Thai language. You could look to see if there are, there's like a Thai community association or something. I happen to know that there is, because once upon a time I did a project on Thai and was able to find Thai speakers in Calgary relatively easily. Or this might apply to other languages. There might be student clubs based on some, nationality or what have you at the university that would be a good resource for a specific language. Churches as well, online, so on and so forth. You could just talk to your classmates, friends, and family. Ask if anybody knows somebody in particular who speaks a language that is one you don't know. This third point here is a piece of advice I got from a student a few years ago. I don't know how currently relevant this idea is, but what they did is they posted an ad to Kijiji, or they talked about something called couch surfing, which may not be relevant in the current circumstances either, but I guess if you go visit a city that you don't know anybody at, you can couch surf and just like find a place to sleep on a couch at night or something like that. I don't know. There's other ways out there. You probably know more about them than me, but I'll just throw that out there in case you're looking for ideas. It's July. I haven't done this yet, but by September, I will kind of ask the grad students in the linguistics program to see if any of them might be interested in working as consultants for this project as well. We have a number of them who don't speak English as a native language, and they are interested in language, and they are almost always very helpful people who are willing to work with you and be patient while you figure out what's going on in their language. Once I find out who those people are this year, I will let you know who they are in case you want to get in touch with them. Yeah, another approach is to check among your classmates, friends, family for a potential consultant, regardless of what particular language they speak. If you speak a language other than English as a native language, you might make an exchange with a classmate who speaks a different language other than English. And a number of students have done this in the past, where they just work with each other as each other's consultants, and it works totally fine. Or if you speak only English natively and write well, you might arrange with a classmate who does not speak English natively to exchange something like weekly proofreading or editing for language consultant sessions, whatever, some sort of exchange you think is fair to you, that's fine too. In the old days, this was a good resource for this sort of project. It's now called the You Speak Global program at the University of Calgary. It doesn't really work anymore for this particular project because they changed the timing of it. So this is a program in which students can learn or practice a foreign language with a native speaker. Yeah, so basically the idea is like if there's a not native speaker of English at the university, let's say they come from China and they want to like improve their English skills, then they will, they're just looking for people that they can sit down and speak English with for a certain amount of time to just kind of get better at the language. And in that theoretical situation, you could say, let's sit down for an hour and speak English, and then let's sit down for an hour each week too, and I can learn a little bit something about Mandarin or whatever variety of Chinese you speak. Unfortunately, as I mentioned here, students who want to participate in this program are now required to apply for it before the semester begins. But I still think it's a good program, so I'm letting you know about it in case you might be interested in participating in it anyways. So yeah, there you go. You can walk through this website in case you want to apply, and hopefully it would work out for you. And it says here, applications will reopen in August for the fall 2020 semester, so check back soon. And it's probably September when you're watching this, so hopefully they're still open. And if they are, I'm okay with you working with a consultant through that program too. Just being clear with them what you're expecting before you get involved with that. And that's true for anybody who works on this project. It might be convenient for you and another student in the class to work together with the same consultant on the course project, and students have done this in a couple of situations over the years, as long as that's okay with the consultant. However, all work that you turn in for the course project must be your own. So you can say sit and talk to this one person together, you and another student in the class, but when you write up your analysis of what they've done, how they speak, that's got to be your own language and your own decisions, basically, right? You can discuss issues relating to the course project with fellow students, but don't simply copy their word lists or portions of their report and then turn it in as your own work. That is cheating and academic misconduct, so don't let me see you do that at all, please. It's also not advisable to work in groups of more than 2 with the same consultant, as that would require an overly excessive amount of the consultant's time and might also make it difficult for each student in the group to have enough time to work with the consultant on their own. So max 2 when you do that, and even with 2, there's a lot of things to watch out for when you're working in that situation. Yeah, I'm just trying to throw out as many ideas as possible here that can work for you, though, just in case you might have difficulty finding a good person to work with. Got a note here, many people learn more than one language as a child. In such cases, you probably will find it more rewarding to ask the person to work with you on a description of the least well-studied language. However, first make sure that the speaker did learn the language as a child and has continued to use it. For example, a person from Taiwan may speak both Taiwanese and Mandarin, i.e. Chinese, as native languages, but in this case, Taiwanese would be the preferred language for your project. To give you another example, my wife, who in the past has worked as a consultant for this, or volunteered, I guess I would say, voluntold as a consultant for this project for various students in the class. My wife speaks Ukrainian and Russian. She speaks them natively. She learned them as a child growing up. So Russian, they're both cool languages, but Russian is a pretty widely spoken one. I mean, you can take classes in Russian within the school itself. Ukrainian is a little less well known, so it's kind of a little more interesting to look at Ukrainian and see what that's doing, as opposed to a more widely spoken language like Russian. Okay, but again, this the caveat here is that the person has to feel comfortable speaking that language. So you can't sort of force them into something they don't like, aren't really native at anymore or fluent at. Yeah, so with that in mind, your first project report will include a brief description of the language under study. I mentioned this earlier. The description should include, first, where the language is spoken. Second, how many people speak the language. Third, the historical relationship of the language with other languages, like a family tree type analysis of where it comes from. And fourthly, the language contact situation. So, to just give you an example of that. So are speakers of the language generally monolingual or bilingual, trilingual, and if so, in what languages? So I'll give you an example with my wife. So she speaks Ukrainian, which is primarily spoken in Ukraine, but obviously there are, Ukrainians who have gone out throughout the rest of the world and have settled in other countries where Ukrainian is spoken as well. You can figure out through different resources how many people in the world speak Ukrainian. It's a Slavic language, which is a sub-branch of like the Indo-European languages. So you could like show me similar sorts of relationships for your language. And then the language contact situation. So like I said, my wife speaks both Ukrainian and Russian from birth. A lot of people in Ukraine speak Russian as well as Ukrainian. It's common for people to be bilingual there to some extent. But there are others who just speak Ukrainian or others who just speak Russian. And then there's like kind of a power imbalance there too. So historically, Russian was the, prestige language. And if you wanted to kind of level up in social status, you would learn it. And Ukrainian was for like the country bumpkins. But now Ukraine's an independent country and people want to speak Ukrainian more to get away from Russia, so on and so forth. So it's complicated, but feel free to explain to me the complications of how people deal with language and whatever situation your consultant came from, how they feel about the particular language they speak and how it relates to other languages in the area. There's a lot of grist for the mill there, basically, which is interesting to read and know when you're analyzing what your consultant does as a speaker of the language. Got a note here, this report is due on Monday, October 5th. I've got it here in the syllabus right there. This is what you need to tell me for that report. And it can be brief, but it should be well written. It should be clear, and it should be comprehensive as well. It should cover all the bases here. And to get information that you might need to answer some of these questions, I've got some texts here which you can find in the library, some basic stuff like Vogelin's classification and index of the world's languages. It's from a while back, but it's still valid. And some other texts which are maybe more useful for, say, the phonetics of different languages. You can get those from the library if you want. And then also note that some of these references will not actually give you the information you're looking for, but they can list grammars and language descriptions, including articles in academic journals, which you can consult for your language. Similarly, another reference which is easy to look at online is Wikipedia, as we've all gotten to know it over the years. When Wikipedia got started, people were very skeptical about it because it was just any random yahoo could just throw their opinions about a topic into Wikipedia, and you wouldn't know if you could trust it. They've gotten better, I think, since like 2005 or whenever they began. So there's reason to always be suspect about Wikipedia, but generally speaking, it's pretty good. One thing you can do with Wikipedia, maybe I'll do this here. What does it say about Ukrainian? So it's the first thing that comes up. So it'll give you lots of information about the Ukrainian language, like where it's spoken, how many people speak it, so on and so forth. And somewhere down here, it should probably give you some grammatical information about it, dialects, so on and so forth. It's got the alphabet, which is cool. I'll say more about that in a second. It doesn't actually say anything about the grammar of it. But one thing it does give you is not Wikipedia stuff. So it gives you lots of references at the bottom of every Wikipedia page. It will let you know where it's getting its authoritative information from, supposedly. So you can follow these links, and they can lead you to sort of more linguistic-y analyses of the language, which may be more useful to you. And of course, as long as I'm here, it's worth mentioning that it's probably not difficult to find information about the phonology of the language. Yeah, here we go, this one. So you can learn a lot that's relevant for phonetics through a page like this in Wikipedia, and this exists for most languages in the world now, which is cool. Yeah, so, and this gives you a variety of sites for those, this information as well. Yeah. So, yeah, take some of that with a grain of salt. That is another resource you can look for. And I mentioned this when I was talking about the course outline, but there is this other website which gives you similar kinds of information, basic information about every single language in the world. Not every single language of the world will have its phonology on Wikipedia, it turns out, but Ethnologue will tell you a little something about every single language. So just to give you an example, it has kind of a fun language of the day sample on its front page every day. Ethnologue over the years has kind of gotten a little uptight about who can access their site. So you have a limited number of page visits allowed per month, I think like 5 or something. So maybe only use this once you know what language you really want to work with. But this one is a language called Namia, which is spoken in Papua New Guinea. 6,000 people speak it, 300 are monolingual. It's probably not a good sign for its future, but we'll see. This, however, says it's vigorous language use, so that is a good sign for its future. Used by all, positive attitude, so on and so forth. And then it's got information on language development and so on and so forth. It should have a full listing in here, which should tell you, okay, so you can't get this at the moment. Yeah, maybe I'll look into sort of buying a subscription for linguistics, because we've talked about that at some length. But when you do get the full listing, you should be able to see, let's see what it says about Ukrainian. No, it doesn't want to do that. Well, it will tell you something about the historical origins of the language. And I'm glad I'm doing this on the fly and finding this out, because this is maybe not as useful as it used to be, which is a shame, because this is a cool website, especially if you're a language geek, which I'm guessing you might be because you're taking advanced phonetics at the university level. Okay, if you are looking for other places to find information on the phonetics of the language, you can also look in various scientific journals, which are focused on the phonetics of the languages of the world. So some examples might be Journal of Phonetics, Phonetica, Language and Speech, Journal of the International Phonetic Association, so on and so forth. There are also journals devoted to specific language groups, such as the International Journal of American Linguistics for like First Nations languages, Journal of African Linguistics, Journal of East Asian Languages, so on and so forth. To find useful academic references like this, follow this link. Yeah, this is our library, and they've got this note here about how they're still getting back up to speed. But go to the L links here. So these are like databases of published research in various topics. So the one that's most relevant to us is Linguistics and Language Behavior Abstracts. And you need to sign in with this. Let's see if I can succeed in doing it. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see if we can find anything on Namia as a language. Maybe. Grammar of Momu, a language of Papua New Guinea. I don't know if that's the exact same one or not. Maybe it is. Maybe they don't want me to find anything out on Ethnologue. This will give you some information or like published journal papers about the language you might be interested in, and they can tell you a lot, or you can learn a lot from this. Obviously, it's kind of the source of our sort of foundation of language knowledge. Okay, this isn't super accurate. It should tell me, if I search Ukrainian phonology, it should tell me about American Jewish summer camps, but what do you know? So you might have to tweak through that a little bit to find what you're looking for. But this is another resource you can use, and you might have to sort of be persistent at it. But just so you know, It's there. And I will also say that when you look at published research on a language, no matter where it comes from, whether it's Wikipedia or Ethnologue or some scientific journal, keep in mind that language descriptions are almost always based on the speech of only a few speakers, sometimes only one speaker. And given that all languages have varieties based on regional, social, or even just idiosyncratic differences, the variety of the language spoken by your consultant will inevitably be at least somewhat different and possibly very different from the variety described in any published study. What I want you to do in this project is tell me how your consultant speaks. Don't look up information in a book and just regurgitate it for me. I don't need that. I want you to get primary data, like from some human being which nobody has recorded before, and figure out how to analyze it. So you're kind of adding in a maybe small way, maybe bigger than you might expect, way to our body of knowledge about the world's languages. And also developing your own field methods and research skills in the process. Okay, if you do get information about your language from a source other than your consultant, in a book or a paper or online or wherever, always cite that source in your write-up and include a reference to it in the bibliography of your little project report. If you don't do this, your grade will go down. If it's clear that you have looked up information and you're not citing that information, I will dock your grade a bit for that. You need to get in the habit of citing that information. If other people have gone through the difficult work of figuring out what's going on in the language, you need to give them credit. And part of this process, this learning process, is so you find out sort of what work has to go into just sort of developing basic information about a language. Yeah, so please respect that. And again, don't cheat. All right. The project reports that you will have to prepare for the course during the semester. There's 5 of them, including one final write-up that will be due after the last class meeting. These reports can be short, but should be well organized and clearly written, outlining your understanding and analysis of various aspects of the language's phonetics. Each of these reports will require you to provide evidence to back up the claims you are making about the phonetic structures which exist in the language. For the initial project reports, this evidence will consist primarily of acoustic recordings you have made of your language consultant, along with measurements you have made of the acoustic features in those recordings. And actually, I just said initial project reports here, but basically project reports 2 through 5. Everything but the first one. So whatever the opposite of initial is there, actually. You are welcome to make the acoustic recordings for your project reports either at home or in the phonetics lab. In general, you will find it easier to do the acoustic analysis required for the reports if you record your language consultant in an environment that is as quiet as possible. Yeah, please get in touch with me by email if you would like to book a time in the lab to make recordings for your project reports. And I've got this language in here because it's what I've always committed to in the past, and I would still like to be able to commit to it in the future. To me, it's a little bit iffy to have people speaking in close quarters in a not super great ventilated space in the booth in the lab, but I'm still open to making that happen if you feel like it would be a good idea for the acoustic quality of your recordings. So I'm just putting that out there. If you want to make such recordings, then get in touch with me, please, and we can work out a way for you to do that. The Phonetics Lab also has a portable digital audio recorder and also 2 mini disc recorders. And again, it might just be easier for you to record through your computer or whatever you're using to talk to your consultant. But these machines, if you want them, are helpful for making high quality recordings in the field. If you are interested in using a recorder for your consulting sessions, please talk to me personally to check out one from the Phonetics Lab. So that's possible too. A brief description of the topics to be covered in each interim report is given below. Each report will be due at the beginning of a Monday lecture. And note that since you are working with real data, you will inevitably come across speech phenomena early on which have not yet been presented in the course lectures. When confronted with such issues, make an educated guess about them and then flag them for later reanalysis. But hopefully it shouldn't be too bewildering because you guys have made it through 341 and also will have made it through the relevant material for each topic well ahead of time. So as I mentioned in the previous video, you got a project report due on supersegmentals here in the 8th week, but most of what we need to know about supersegmentals we cover kind of in weeks 3 and 4. For vowels, that's due on week 12, and we talk about vowels a lot in weeks 8 and 9. so on and so forth. But each one of these is due on a Monday, and I try to spread them out by about 2 or 3 weeks apart in each case. Yeah, so again, your first project report is due on week 5. And say, see the information on finding a language consultant and finding information about the language they speak up above in this handout. From your consultant, you will also need to know where they grew up, what other languages they speak, and at what age these languages were learned. This report should be about a page in length, maybe 2. So again, what you're doing here is you are getting information about the language that your consultant speaks, and you're also getting a little bit of information about the human being that you're working with who speaks that language. You don't need to name your consultant in the paper if they don't want to have their name shared, or if you don't want to share it. All I need to know is that they're a particular person who speaks the language and some background information about them, so I know kind of how they've used the language throughout their life. You can name them if they're okay with that. It doesn't make that much of a difference either way. So I'm not going to get particular about that. Report 2 is due in week 8. So other than this, by the way, make sure you cite any sources used to prepare that report, as I mentioned before. Don't forget that, please. Report number 2. For this report, you should present an overview and analysis of the suprasegmental structures of the language. Does the language have lexical tones, pitch accents, or stress? We'll talk about those when we go through prosody. Also, look at the intonation of the language. So transcribe a long declarative sentence and a short one, along with WH questions, yes/no questions, echo and alternative questions. What are the intonation patterns like in these recordings you make? What pitch range does each speaker use? That sort of thing. Basically, each one of these reports, you'll try to develop a model for sort of the contrasted differences you can find in the language. And then on the basis of that analysis of the language, you will also present evidence for sort of each contrastive item in the language. The suprasegmental one is a little bit different because it's dealing with sort of these, broader global features of speech, which don't kind of get pinned down to one word necessarily or one sound, but they're always there. So that one's a little fuzzy, but I tried to give you sort of a particular structure to look for to kind of help you out in preparing that report. Reports 3 and 4 about vowels and consonants. So report 3, in this report you should present a vowel chart modeled on the one in the IPA, in which you present the contrastive vowels of the language. You should present each contrastive vowel in a meaningful word in the language, ideally in minimal pairs. You should also make recordings of your consultant producing each vowel and make a vowel space chart of their first and second formant measurements for each vowel in this report. So first part of this, you need to make a vowel chart. We've seen similar things when, say, looking at English in 341, but just say, I've got a list of words which contrast only in vowels, like teak, tick, take, tack, so on and so forth. Each one of those words just has a different vowel in the middle. So present a series of words like that. Present them in the phonetic form in which they're pronounced in your consultant's language. Make a transcription of what they would actually say. Give me the English gloss, the translation for that particular form, and then also make a recording of your consultant producing that word in their language. Ideally, you want to get forms in the language in which they only contrast on the basis of the vowels in the words themselves, like teak and take, so on and so forth. That's an ideal case, but if you can't find minimal pairs in your consultant's language that just differ on the basis of vowels, then at least give me an example of the vowel in a particular word so I can see that it exists and doesn't seem like it's the same as a vowel in a different word. Once you get those minimal pair sets, or at least the sort of inventory of words that you want your consultant to produce, then record them as they actually say those words. And on the basis of those recordings, you should be able to get into the acoustics of each production and figure out what the specific formant frequencies are that your consultant produced with each vowel. Calculate those formant frequencies and plot those formant frequencies on a graph. one of the reasons I want you to do this is so that you can see kind of how the formant frequencies line up with each other. So if you think, maybe there might be a case where you think there's supposed to be a contrast based on like what you read in a book or something like that, but your consultant doesn't actually produce a difference between the two vowels. In that case, the formant should line up for those two productions, right? You should be able to sort of get scientific proof of what's actually going on in your consultant's language. Or you may get an entirely different picture of what's going on in your consultant's language based on sort of the evidence you can see for each vowel. Okay, that was a lot about a short report, and I'm going to talk about it later again in a subsequent video, but that's the basic idea. You want to have basically a theory of how your consultant's language works in terms of contrasts and minimal pairs, that sort of thing. But don't focus too heavily on minimal pairs, please. Students get hung up on that and like sometimes just don't present any evidence at all if they can't find a minimal pair. That's bad. You have to present some evidence for your theories in each report, and then you have to record your speaker producing that evidence too and analyze it acoustically. So the way it works for report number 4, which is due close to the end of the semester, this is on stops and phonation. So in this report, you list in the fashion of an IPA consonant chart all of the stop consonants and phonation contrasts that exist in your consultant's language. Along with this IPA chart, you should ideally list minimal pairs of words documenting the existence of each contrast that you present in the table. You should also measure the voiced onset time of the stops in these minimal pairs to document and quantify the various phonation contrasts in the language. So yeah, this is like, unfortunately the only examples I can think of are P, T, and key. Like, come up with a list of words like that in your consultant's language that only differ, say, in place of articulation for stops at the beginning of a word. That's a nice set of minimal pairs, P, T, and key. And then put those words in a table with transcriptions as to how they're pronounced in your consultant's language. Give me the English translations of each word. Record those words and then measure the amount of VOT for each stop at the beginning of each word, like how much VOT is there in the P, how much VOT is there for T, K, so on and so forth. That's like the report for vowels, so hopefully it should be relatively easy once you get to this point. Report number 5, this is the Your Choice report. So for this report, investigate a phonetic aspect of the language that hasn't been recovered in any of your first 4 project reports. Or usually what happens is that people in studying for the first 4 project reports have learned something interesting about the language, and they kind of want to be able to like follow up on that or focus on it. So this report should be similar in scope and style to reports number 2 through number 4, and also include data that you have taken directly from your speaker that you have been able to quantitatively analyze in some way. So this data does not necessarily need to include acoustic recordings, but may also involve articulatory measurements or some other types of phonetic data. Like I said, I'm going to do that palatography demo, hopefully by the end of class. So if you don't want to make further acoustic recordings, you could just do like a palatography demo with your consultant if they're okay with that. The topic of this report may focus on whatever phonetic feature of the language interests or intrigues you most, including glides, fricatives, trills, or sonants, basically these other sounds that we don't cover explicitly in reports number 2 through 4. You can do anything with that, including secondary articulations, voice quality, syllable structure, whatever, piques your interest. But you must inform me of the topic you plan to cover in this report by the time you have submitted project number 4. Project report number 4, which is due on December 7th. So that's only with a couple weeks to go before this one is due, because this course project report will be due on December 23rd, 2 weeks after our last class for the semester. Okay, but it's up to you to make that decision. So the natural thing to do is to decide on something that interests you. Just let me know ahead of time about what you're going to work on. Okay, lastly, how to work with your language consultant. So some of the project reports require you to provide minimal pairs and sets from your language of study. Examples of minimal pairs and sets for various languages may be found online. It's relatively easy to do that. Say if you want to, work with Italian, you can probably find, some minimal pairs for Italian pretty easily, either by looking at like online dictionaries or maybe somebody's constructed like a minimal pair set for the language. You can look through other published resources such as Ladavogen and Madison's The Sounds of the World's Languages, which talks about languages which are more obscure than Italian, or from a grammar for the language that you are studying. And you can find these grammars in the library as well, right? In searching for such example words in your language, you may find the published research on the language to be very helpful, but you should never just reproduce a minimal set that you find in a reference. Rather, you should elicit the words from your consultant and report your own transcriptions of their speech, which may be substantially different from the pronunciations reported in the source material. So again, I don't want you regurgitating something you've read out of a book for me. You can use books to help you do this project, but I want you to let me know how your consultant actually speaks. That's the goal here, is to find out what really happens in reality, because that's the foundation of science, right? Okay, one strategy that I would recommend is to take down the English glosses of the target words from your source and ask your speaker to translate those words for you. So let's say you get a minimal set from a grammar of whatever, copy those and then ask the speaker to kind of translate or copy what these words are supposed to mean from this grammar, and then ask your speaker to translate those words for you. Then transcribe and record what they say and try to determine how well they match up with the material you've derived from your source. And ideally, they'll give you a 100% match, but they're probably going to give you something which is a little bit different. So just make a note of what they're actually saying or what they think those words actually mean. You may also try exploratory elicitations where you present a hypothetical form, like one you've already recorded from your consultant, or is mentioned in a published description, and ask if it exists. So you can say, for example, you have a word phos in the language. Is the word vos? To try to look for sort of an F versus V contrast in the language, which you might expect is there. So this can be a good way to find minimal pairs and sets for languages for which there's little published documentation. Say if you're dealing not with Italian, but with some obscure variant of Italian, like I think I once had a student work on Ligurian, which is spoken in Italy, which I did not know about before, and I don't know how much there's been published on Ligurian, but you don't have to rely on it, right? You can rely on your consultant because they have the knowledge in their head. Another tip, it's helpful to try to imitate words that your consultant produces for you. So try to match their productions as accurately as possible until the consultant is satisfied that you are reproducing the form correctly. Note that in some cases it may be just as helpful for you to watch your consultant speak as it is for you to listen to them speak. So use all your senses to be a good observer. That's also kind of the foundation of science too. Also remember in this project that you are the one with expertise in linguistics, while your consultant is an expert in speaking their native language. So do not expect them to immediately understand the concept of minimal pairs or be prepared to do all of the work of finding minimal pairs in their language for you. This is not you just getting some other person who speaks a language you don't know to do all of your work for you. You have to do your part of the project, which is to be the expert in linguistics and how phonetics works. They are probably not going to know anything about that. So instead of that, expect to work on your project collaboratively with your consultant and be prepared to bring to the table your own knowledge of phonetics and phonology in order to provide structure to the native speaker intuitions that your consultant is able to provide to you. Yeah, so they have intuitions. They don't necessarily have any explicit knowledge about how language works. That's what you do. That's why you're going to school and getting this degree. So put it to good use in this context. Lastly, a table of phonemes is a theory about how your consultant's language works. As a scientist, your job is to back up that theory with evidence. Minimal pairs are an ideal form of evidence for things like phonemic contrasts, but they are not the only form of evidence that you can provide. Near minimal pairs, or just any example words at all, will suffice in cases where you are not able to pin down perfect examples of contrast in the language. So some languages are good for minimal pairs, some are not. Say, going back to Cantonese, when I was in grad school, I actually did a project very much like this on Cantonese, which I had never heard spoken before or didn't even realize it existed somehow. And it was super easy to get minimal pairs in Cantonese because everything's kind of organized at the syllable level with like maybe onset nucleus coda. So there's lots of minimal pairs that form there, which also kind of differentiate on the basis of lexical tones. It's a fun language. A language which is not so good for minimal pairs is like Arabic, where sometimes it seems like it's impossible for students to find minimal pairs in the language just because of the way its morphology works, right? So in that case, you don't have to necessarily pin down two words which differ in only one sound, but at least give me words where you can see the sounds that you're talking about in like your vowel chart or your consonant chart or stops chart, whatever. Just make sure you have some evidence there that a speaker could produce and you could record, so that I know that there's some legitimacy to the claim you're making that, well, these are two different sounds in the language. More details on what is expected from each individual course project will be provided as we make our way through the semester. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to make some recordings for those individual course project reports if I don't lose my voice first. But hopefully this makes it clear what's expected. And again, at this point, if you're watching this, the main goal is to tackle the first kind of most difficult part of this and find a good person to work with. And I'm giving you 4 weeks to do that, a whole month. So get to work on that early, and you'll be able to come up with a good consultant, hopefully early as well. And you'll have to, and you can kind of stop worrying about it quickly. All right, I'm going to stop. I think I've rambled on long enough, but yeah, the less you procrastinate with this, the better the product will be at the end. So yeah, and let me know if you have questions as you go. We'll talk about this throughout the semester too. All right, be back again for other course project report videos, which you'll see later on in the semester. So much for now. See you.